upper hand because of the units that he took out of Lomo's, but Lomo continued to maraud with these vultures, is keeping Fantasy a little bit off balance, but you just feel that Fantasy has still perhaps an edge here. Lomo now putting another expansion down, I believe, at the 6 o'clock expo. Now Fantasy's finally been able to get up that ramp. Lomo continuing to persist with the spider mines, which Fantasy so far has tackled brilliantly, and Lomo's in huge trouble now because Fantasy's worked his way across to Lomo's expo at the 6 o'clock position, and Lomo with only the one siege tank. Fantasy has the advantage of height there on that ramp, trying to get down that ramp, and Lomo's forced to use vultures to defend, and Fantasy has now been able to get those reinforcements through that spider mine corridor, vulture mine corridor, and 4 siege tanks and 2 Goliaths now pushing forward consistently. Fantasy has just been forcing his way down the map despite Lomo's attempts to resist, and it looks like Fantasy's going to set up a blockade siege here. Lomo seems to have been buying himself time. He's managed to get a few siege tanks out, and Lomo just about holds and pushes Fantasy back. Great battle between these two, but you've got to feel that Lomo's expanded, and once more 2 Goliaths being taken out of Fantasy, almost losing another couple of Goliaths and a siege tank. There is one spider mine near there though. Lomo is going to take doing significant damage to Fantasy's forces with those well-placed spider mines. Another siege tank goes down. He is bringing an SCV alongside to repair, but Fantasy is establishing an advanced position. He's got about 5 siege tanks up on that ramp here, and it's all about map control, which is why you can see why Terran versus Terran is such a huge matchup on this map, such a popular matchup on this map, because of the map control that can be established on higher ground with those siege tanks. Lomo persisting again with the vultures. He really has no choice. He has to try and fight a way back into this game to keep Fantasy off guard, to keep him from reinforcement. But Fantasy, with large groups of units moving forward with very strong control groups, 3 siege tanks and 4 Goliaths on that occasion, Lomo has positioned a decent amount of forces in the middle of the map, trying to prevent Fantasy from reinforcing. Once again, Lomo managed to take out an SCV building Fantasy's expansion, so that does give Lomo a slight edge. He has had that second expansion, i.e. third command center, up slightly longer than Fantasy's, and loads of spider mines up on that ramp, preventing Fantasy from getting up there, and looks like Fantasy is going to be pushed back by those vultures, and Lomo has got siege tanks positioned in a decent position as well, so Fantasy unable to reinforce that little task force that he's got positioned in the middle of the map around the eastern side of the map, just north of the 6 o'clock position. Fantasy has got that force entrenched in there, but he hasn't been able to reinforce it. Meanwhile, Starport with control tower going down for Fantasy, he realizes he needs dropships to bypass those spider mines and entrenched positions. Lomo once again is going to try and take that position out of Fantasy. He couldn't leave it there forever, and he has been able to take that out without too many losses on his side, it has to be said. He just barreled up the ram, and Fantasy's lost those units, so Fantasy's struggling to maintain a group in this game. Once again pushing forward, this time with a much larger force, about 6 or 8 siege tanks as well as 4 Goliaths, and I'm not sure if Lomo has the ground power to match. He's continued around those spider mines, takes out half the siege tanks, more of the siege tanks get taken out with spider mines. Fantasy's suiciding his army into Lomo's units. Horrible play by Fantasy. He just perhaps didn't account for the amount of spider mines that were there, and the 3 siege tanks get taken out without killing another siege tank. Fantasy in huge trouble here. Could we be seeing an upset? Fantasy, SKT1's stalwart Terran player, the top Terran player on SKT1, Boxer's Prodigy, is being ripped to shreds right now by Lomo with very aggressive vulture play. I have to say, I felt initially Fantasy had the advantage, but Lomo persisted with the aggressive vultures and has now managed to knock Fantasy off balance. Fantasy, I feel, was being too aggressive when he didn't really have the position to be able to do it. There were spider mines all over the map, and Fantasy just walked into them, losing that group of 8 siege tanks and 4 vultures. And you've got to say that Lomo is a firm favorite now. He's got the economic advantage. He's got the advantage of force on the ground. There was a period of time after that first attack where Fantasy had more units on the ground, but he wasn't able to press on that advantage. Lomo defended brilliantly with his spider mines, persisting with his vultures, throwing them into the fray. We do know how cheap vultures are. Fantasy deciding to concentrate on siege tanks and Goliaths, and it hasn't paid out for him. So Lomo now in an incredibly strong position, and now setting up that contain that Fantasy was trying to. Fantasy trying to once again push forward towards the middle of the map, try and retake some ground. He does have that large force in the middle. Lomo's force is slightly more spread out, but I do feel that Lomo's probably got more units on the ground than Fantasy. Fantasy, the only advantage Fantasy really has is that he's got a more mobile force with that Starship plus control tower. Lomo only now putting on a starport. I don't believe he has a starport with control tower yet, so he doesn't have dropships. That is something that Lomo does have. So if Fantasy can use that, he can buy himself a way back into this game. If he can drop those expansions of Lomo's and inflict some heavy damage on Lomo's units. And Fantasy now loading up the 2 dropships. Looks like that's exactly what he's going to go for. Lomo has set up an expansion at the 3 o'clock position, and I believe that's the expansion that Fantasy is going to go for. And Lomo is going to struggle to defend at various points. But and the other problem for Lomo obviously is that he doesn't have Goliaths. He did not put an army down for a long time. I'm not sure even if he has one now. And Lomo forced to defend with vultures against that. And Lomo's emplaced positions just getting completely destroyed by Fantasy. Siege Tank does manage to take out. Lomo somehow holds his defense with the one Siege Tank being repaired by the SCV. I was shocked there. I thought those 2 dropships full of units dropping on that group of Siege Tanks and vultures would have taken it out, but Lomo reinforced it with more vultures and then brought in a couple more ground units from behind. Fantasy immediately loading up the 2 dropships again, going to drop right on top, and Lomo needs to do something here. He needs to get some sort of air support in. Fantasy now going straight for that expansion. And actually, it's Fantasy's expansion that's coming under siege at the 1 o'clock position, and Fantasy trying to retake it, but Lomo is holding here. Despite having no anti-air, Lomo is holding. He's trying to put down some turrets. Fantasy has a brief window of time before those dropships become obsolete, but that command center is coming under heavy fire. Once again, Lomo with perfect Spider-Man placement, and Fantasy just doesn't have the scans, doesn't have the comm center to really be able to affect anything. Now dropping out 4 siege tanks. Spider-Man's in between them, and the siege tanks almost get taken out, but they hold. So Fantasy just about able to defend that expansion and able to take it. And now slowly expanding the siege tanks, but Lomo bringing reinforcements in straight away, sending Spider-Mines in to absorb hits from the siege tank, getting his own siege tanks in range, and this one hit's going to be crucial. Fantasy loses that siege tank as well. He's only got 1 siege tank left holding the defense. Lomo coming in with further reinforcements to finish it off, and Fantasy is going to lose this expansion, and it looks like this is going to be GG, folks. I'm going to call this game for Lomo right now. Incredible game of StarCraft. I really thought Fantasy was in a superior position, but Lomo has countered him at every turn, and his vulture play has been reminiscent of some of the antics we've seen from Flash, some of the crazy psychotics we've seen from Flash, and it's just brilliant to watch, I have to say. And it's an upset that no one expected, because certainly Terran versus Terran isn't Lomo's strongest matchup, whereas Fantasy, again, I'm going to have to check the stats on this, guys, after this drop. Four dropships coming in from Fantasy. This is his last chance. Maybe if he can take out a bunch of supply depots, slow down his opponent's building rate, but there's no room to drop there. He's instead going to be forced to drop behind that 3 o'clock expansion. Lomo's going to just move those SCVs out and lift that command center. I don't think Fantasy's really going to be able to affect a lot of damage here. Even if he does take that command center out, it's not going to bother Lomo too much, because he's got all of the map, and you can just see, and this is why StarCraft is such a beautiful game. It's so expressive. It's like the face of an amazing actor. You just look at the mini-map and you can see it. You can see the big smile, the big red smile of Lomo. You can see the little scrunched up frown of yellow of Fantasy, and you can see who's dominating. You can tell who's winning. And even someone who hasn't, and that's why I believe StarCraft is so enjoyable to watch, even someone who hasn't watched StarCraft before can look at the map, can see the big red, can see the small yellow, can tell you who's winning. They can see the explosions, they can see the red swarming all over the yellow, and they can tell you that the yellow is being subdued and overpowered and overcome by the red of Lomo. And SKT1 are going to go 2-1 down in this crucial matchup, and this could be the turning point here for Hwasong Oz, where I thought the coach made a few silly decisions. Well, I'm being shown up here by Lomo. Perhaps I underestimated them, perhaps SKT1 underestimated him, and Fantasy did as well. Perhaps he thought this was going to be a walk in the park for him. Well, that's not certainly going to be the case. He's finally been able to secure that expansion at the 1 o'clock position with the drop of siege tanks, but a very large force from Lomo is coming in, about 20 siege tanks, and they're going to siege right on top of the ramp with a height advantage, and Fantasy's siege tanks unfortunately are within range of those tanks. The first volley takes out about 3 or 4 siege tanks. He's only got about 3 siege tanks with Goliath. He's struggling to bring reinforcements in, but unfortunately forces are being constantly whittled down, and Fantasy is gradually being completely overpowered by Lomo here. Lomo is just going to waltz right in. Fantasy not reinforcing that position. He surrendered that position at the 1 o'clock base, and where is he going to get resources from? That is Fantasy's dilemma. He's running out of minerals, and he doesn't know where to turn, because Lomo has got the map completely and utterly locked down. Fantasy with a group of about 5 dropships, dropping in a small number of units to try and take those turrets down before advancing further on that expansion just south of his main, but he's really having to pay a very heavy price. He's having to pay thousands upon thousands of lives of soldiers and units just to secure every single inch of ground. He's being made to pay by Lomo's excellent strategy and positioning, and it should be the other way around. Fantasy is the one who needs to be inflicting the heavier casualties, but Lomo has superior position. Unfortunately, that's the way StarCraft is. Advantages tend to accumulate, and Lomo, once he had the advantage, has not let